Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to Teacher Development Webinars. My name is Amanullah Sand. I facilitate virtual programs at Teacher Development Webinars. Teacher Development Webinars is a social action project implemented by British Council elected citizens in Pakistan as a response to COVID-19 crisis. It is an initiative to support teachers and educators around the world with professional development opportunities. We are thankful to Master English Training for sponsoring a Zoom account. And for today's webinar, Technology and Principles in Language Teaching, we have Mr. Hugh Dellar. And in this webinar, we look at how best to implement pedagogy in a digital arena. We'll discuss the teacher's concern to focus on language and to act on principles of learning. And finally, we'll suggest how technology can follow principles whilst at the same time showing parallel non-tech solutions. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Hugh Dellar for this webinar. Hugh Dellar has over 25 years experience in the field and is the co-founder of the online language school and training company, Lexical Lab. He has co-authored two 5-level journal English series, Outcomes and Innovations, both published by National Geographic Learning, as well as one level of the high school series, Perspectives. His first methodology book, Teaching Lexically, came out via Delta Publishing in 2016. Most recently, he has worked on 2 levels of the new Pearson Journal English series roadmap. We are pleased to have you, Hugh. Welcome to Teacher Development Webinars.
Thank you very much. So, hello everyone out there. Give me a minute. I'm just going to share my screen. One second. Right, I think that's us. So, hi. Thank you very much, Amanullah, for the kind introduction and for inviting me to be here. I'm always happy to be able to work with teachers during such a long, strange year. In a way, this whole talk that I'm going to be giving today, this idea of looking at what kind of principles we believe when it comes to teaching online, is very much the result of COVID, okay? At the beginning of this year, I was basically making my living by writing course books. As you heard, I've written this 6-level series called Outcomes. I was running a London summer school for Lexical Lab, doing face-to-face training for particularly non-native speaker teachers and language students. And I was traveling quite a bit and doing overseas training. And when COVID came along, this destroyed all of this for me, basically. I've been self-employed for 6 years, and suddenly I was faced with this scary reality. I realized we wouldn't be able to run the London summer school because of the lockdown here. I realized I wouldn't be able to go and do any overseas training, you know, for the foreseeable future until they have the virus under control. And the sales of course books just fell through the floor, basically, because language schools were closing left, right, and center. So I had a moment of panic in March where I thought, what am I going to do to survive this year? And I decided to set up a little online language school, specializing in high-level language development and teacher training as well online. And we've been doing this now for the last 8 months and, you know, kind of enjoying it as much as you can when you're spending your entire life living in Zoom. Probably like many of you, I actually feel like I live in Zoom and sometimes I visit North London. Sometimes when I'm out in the street, it's like, oh, the real world. I've forgotten what it looks like. Because, you know, just so much time seeing myself in this little box and seeing the people I work with in little boxes. But out of all of this, I've been reading a lot and thinking a lot about online teaching and what makes good online practice and what makes bad online practice. And I think the first thing to say is that just because you're using technology to teach, it doesn't mean you're teaching well, okay? I think there's become a kind of I don't know, a hierarchy of self-importance among teachers. And there's this kind of idea that the more technological you are with your teaching, somehow the better teacher you must be. But as you don't need me to tell you, good teaching has always been going on with or without technology. Yeah? Can you turn your mic off, whoever's got your mic on? Yeah. So good teaching isn't the same as just using tech. You can be a great teacher and not use any technology. You can use minimal technology and be doing great teaching. You can use loads of technology and be a great teacher, or you can use minimal technology or loads of technology and not be delivering great, fruitful, useful lessons that are beneficial for your students. And I think what we need to remember is what's the bottom line when it comes to what we do as language teachers. My favourite ever quote about language teaching was by Michael Swan, the grammarian, who once said, "Language teachers teach language." That's it, that's simple. My own feeling is we should probably all have this kind of written on the wall above where we teach to remind ourselves of what we're there to do. And I think it's easy to forget this. It's easy to kind of lose sight of the fundamental reality of our jobs because we're encouraged to do so many other things. We have to teach 21st century skills. We have to teach critical thinking skills. We have to teach digital literacy skills. It's like more and more elements of other things are dumped onto us as language teachers, to the point where I think sometimes we forget our job is language teacher. That's what we're there to do. And obviously, this can be done through digital means. It can also be done through non-digital means. I think one of the problems with trying to teach digitally is there's so much stuff out there and so many people trying to sell us, you know, websites, platforms, apps, courses, etc., that it can be overwhelming. I'm sure most of you have already felt overwhelmed this year, just switching to, you know, Google Teams or Zoom or Skype or whatever it is you're using to deliver online lessons. I don't know how it's been for you, but for me, just learning to make this transition and get used to it has already been quite stressful, you know, in a year where there's all kinds of other stresses piled on top of us as well. And so I think we need to approach what's out there with a kind of critical or skeptical eye. Maybe like some of you, I subscribe to emails from various people who send out links for technological tools and tips that language teachers can use. So there are people like Russell Stannard and Nick Peachy who share their findings about digital sources available for teachers. And when I have time, you know, it's difficult because I teach a lot. I'm married, I've got 2 kids. I try to, you know, do other things apart from just teach. But when I've got time, I try to spend time engaging with what's out there and looking at it. And a lot of it just isn't very good. One of the first tech tools I ever came across was a thing called Lingro, which is still out there. And basically what Lingro does is it provides you with a space online where you can drop any article from any source, and it will allow you to have a pop-up dictionary, okay? And it will also store the words that you look up and turn them into learning games, which we'll return to later. The problem is the dictionary that it uses isn't written by lexicographers. It isn't written by people who know how to explain language in a way that's easy for foreign students to understand. It's all open source, free access dictionary online, and it's really not very good. This is a screenshot from the first time I ever looked at this, and the fact there's a headline about Obama tells you how long ago this was. But I checked recently, and Lingro is basically exactly the same dictionaries, same problems, same issues. And what you get here is, you drop a headline in like Obama pledges not to delay Afghan withdrawal. Maybe the student thinks, I don't know this word, withdrawal. Let me click on it. When you click on it, you get the pop-up dictionary, which tells you receiving from someone's care what one has earlier entrusted to them. What? Usually refers to money. Well, and that's quite difficult to understand. And it's obviously not what they're talking about here. So maybe it's the second meaning. Obama pledges not to delay Afghan withdrawal. Withdrawal, a type of metabolic shock the body undergoes when a substance, usually a toxin such as heroin, is withheld. Again, written in language that's more difficult than the word you're looking up and not the meaning. So it must be meaning three. Meaning three, an act of withdrawing. Well, thank you for that. That's really helpful. It's useless. It's a complete waste of time looking through these kinds of very, very poorly written and poorly designed online dictionaries that make life harder for learners. Another recent example that I was sent was a thing called Snappy Words. Okay, Snappy Words advertises itself as a kind of new, sexy, fun, exciting, visual online dictionary. You can see they've got a little light bulb at the top there, so you can have your light bulb moment. And it says, language, play, ideas, fun, meanings. What you do here is you add a word into the dictionary thing here, and you press go, and it gives you a list of connected words, like a web of language around the word you're looking for. The problem is, again, it's insane. So you put in people and you get things like enlightened, peanut gallery. I have no idea what peanut gallery means. Retarded, ancients, blonde, blind, age group. So again, for students, they're looking at this thinking, well, it's very visual and there's a lovely exploding digital multicolored diagram, but how does this help me learn English? And I think a lot of these tools actually, while they may be well advertised, they may be well sold, they're very difficult to learn, to use and to learn from, and they make life harder for both teachers and students. So, just because it's online, it doesn't mean it's going to be useful. Just because it's digital, it doesn't mean it's user-friendly. It doesn't mean it will help students at your level. And I think part of the problem is the principles which underpin a lot of what's out there on the internet. And I think often the principles are these. They're not always stated, but I think this is what's going on. Grammar and vocabulary are treated very much as separate things. Either you have lots of exercises looking at particular grammar structures, or you have lots of single words going on. Okay, as in the examples I've just showed you. Usage is treated as unimportant. There's no attempt to show you common ways in which these words often work. Where you do get vocabulary, it's often just random lexical sets. So there are hundreds of websites where you have things like label the objects in the house, and you can do a drag and drop self-correcting exercise. So you can look at things and say, oh, sofa, oh, armchair, oh, carpet, curtains. Well, this is great if you want to be a human naming machine and not learn how to speak English very well. If someone came to my house and all they can do is to walk around saying, staircase, frying pan, I would just think they were a little bit strange. Or I would think they'd spent too much time online looking at lexical sets of objects in the household. There's an idea that learning should be fun. There's an idea that skills are at least as important as language. And I think this is reflected in things like, 21st century skills, digital skills, critical thinking skills. There's an idea that we have to be creative, we have to play. And there's an idea that having access to more resources means better. And I think all of these ideas are problematic. So what I'm going to go on to do is to explore 6 big problems that I've seen happening this year where people are teaching online. Excuse me, allow me a sip of tea. I'm on a much earlier start than many of you, so it's only 9 o'clock for me here. So I think one of the problems is the internet and digital teaching has kind of encouraged the cult of the amateur. This was a phrase invented by a guy called Andrew Keane in 2007. In the old days, when most of us were teaching from course books, and as a course book writer, I should say I have a vested interest in this particular part of the presentation. But I know from writing course books that they go through a very rigorous process before they're delivered to teachers. There's content editors, there's copy editors, they're trialed around the world by different teachers. We get feedback, we draft, we redraft, we redraft the work that we're doing. And they're often looked at by local ministries of education and so on. So the material that we provide is worked really, really hard. Sadly, this isn't always the case with material that's online. A few years ago, I used to work at University of Westminster, where I was in charge of a section of the EFL department. And one day during the summer school, when we hired lots of extra teachers, I went to watch one of the young teachers we'd hired. And he was doing a lesson that he'd downloaded off a popular online site called One Stop English, which is run by Macmillan, I believe. And he'd photocopied this lesson and brought it into the classroom. And this was a pre-intermediate group, okay, kind of, A2 level students, not grade level students. The headline that he had students look at was, "Royal Wedding passes without a hitch as Kate and William seal it with a kiss." And students had to predict what they thought the article was about. And students said, "Royal Wedding." Good, well done. Kate and William, which had been the previous weekend. So, they used their prediction skills. They then read through the article and they had to find out, were you right? Guess what? They were right. This kind of went on for like half an hour, with the teacher having to explain lots of random bits of vocabulary, like what does hitch mean? What does seal mean? And afterwards we were talking about the lesson and I said, was quite surprised you tried this text with this level class. Well, it seemed quite a difficult text to me. I mean, most pre-intermediate students don't need and don't know it passed without a hitch, they sealed it with a kiss, etc. And the teacher said to me, "Oh no, look, well, on the site where I downloaded it from, it said you can use this article with any class from elementary to advanced. You just need to change the tasks you do with it." And so you had a text that was basically much too difficult for a group of students, with language that was too difficult for a group of students, with a kind of idiot Mickey Mouse task that made the students kind of pretend, well done, you can predict and find content. And on top of that, the language that they did learn, well, what was it for? How did this language contribute to their communicative competence? What can they now talk about better that they couldn't talk about before? What was the goal of learning this language? Will this language ever be re-encountered? Will the material that that teacher brings into the classroom revise and recycle that language? Almost certainly not. Because what you do when you download one lesson from here, then another lesson from here, then another lesson from here, is you dilute the kind of revising and recycling of language that as a coursebook writer, I know I'm including in my course books. So I think this is a problem. I think where you have this kind of cult of the amateur and this downloading of random lessons written very quickly in order to be contemporary or in order to make sure you have 5 lessons every week for the subscribers that have signed up to your website. Well, this is damaging because it undermines expertise. You know, there's no editors involved in this. There's no other teachers trialing the material. You know, there's no process. There's no publishing going on here. There's no course coherence or links from lesson to lesson. And as a result, all of this, I think, sacrifices language principles and learning principles for commercial principles, basically, in this particular instance. And I think we need to be careful about this. I think on top of this, there's what I would call the authenticity fallacy. There's an idea that because we can use the internet to bring in content from anywhere, we can watch YouTube videos, we can watch TED Talks, we can read articles from the Washington Post or, you know, the New Delhi Times or whatever. Because of this, we must be doing this. Well, I don't think it's that simple. I don't think that just because something's online, it's going to be authentic for your students. Right back in 1980, Henry Widdowson wrote about the idea that no text can be said to be authentic in and of itself in a classroom. And if anything, a text that's written for language learners at a particular level in order to teach those language learners language is authentic for a language classroom. It's more authentic than a TED Talk or an article from a British newspaper because it's authentically written for that group of learners. Even then, actually what needs to happen in the classroom is the text needs to be authenticated through the process of interaction between the students and the teacher and the text. So there needs to be an effort to choose your language focus and to make the language focus relevant to your students' level and to your students' desired outcome. This means choosing quite carefully the language that you're looking at, thinking about, is it quite high frequency, useful language? Is it connected to a particular communicative outcome? On top of that, will there be space in the lesson for students to exchange their ideas and feelings and beliefs around the text? Maybe related to culture or related to diversity. Will there be space for students to authenticate the language? Will they be able to personalize the language? If the answer is yes, great. That text will probably be authenticated by your students. But it doesn't have to come from authentic sources. It can just come from a course book, okay? There's nothing saying that because it comes from YouTube, these things are more likely to happen. I mean, if anything, material from a course book is more easy to do this to because someone has already thought about the text, the grading, the level, the language that's focused on, and creating space for personal responses. It may be you can do that yourself with texts you find online. If you can, great. That's an authenticated text in the language classroom. But just because it's online doesn't mean it will be authenticated. I think on top of all of this, there's the really serious issue of how long all this stuff takes to do and who's paying. If you're a self-employed teacher, maybe making your own material is sensible because you're investing in yourself as a brand. If you're working for a school or an institution, a college, a university or whatever, and suddenly you're being asked to do all this extra work online and to make all this extra material, well, who's paying for that time? I mean, if you are, you're working extra hours for free and you're participating in your own exploitation. I think one thing that we need to accept is Teaching technologically, and particularly making material, doesn't make things quicker. Excuse me, a quick bit of tea. Years ago, I used to do a lot of EAP, English for Academic Purposes. I used to teach academic support and linguistic support for foreign students doing degrees or pre-sessional courses in the UK. And around about 2010, 2011, I started to feel, my daughter was born around this time, and I had a lot going on at home. I started to feel I needed to be spending less time marking essays. I felt like I was spending all my free time looking at student essays. And I thought maybe technology can help me. I found this free kind of, I don't know, device, this tool called Jing, where I could show on the computer screen the essays that students sent me, and I could record myself talking about them. And each Jing video was only 5 minutes long. So I thought, this is great. I can just make 5-minute videos about each essay. This will force me to focus on the most important things. I can send it to students. They might enjoy it more because it's not just a red pen going through their essay. It's a little personalized video. Sounds great, right? Well, the problem is I hardly ever managed to make a 5-minute video in 5 minutes, because what would happen is I would start making it, I would forget what I wanted to say, or an email would pop up, or my daughter would come into the room, or the doorbell would ring, or I would lose my train of thought, or I would go over the 5-minute limit, or I would swear because I was getting frustrated with doing it, and I'd have to stop and make it again. And on a bad day, it was taking me like an hour and 10 or 12 different takes to get to the stage where I could send a 5-minute video. So, is it better? Nah, in this situation, not at all. Are there better uses of technology for teaching? Yes, but let's not kid ourselves about how long they take. At Westminster, when I used to work there, we were asked to develop some material to help our students with the academic word list. So we started writing tests, and then we started thinking, well, if students are doing these tests as self-study material, they need feedback, the kind of feedback a teacher would give if they were checking the answers in class. So we would do things like, in order to assess, assessment, or assessed the relative efficacy of the treatments, we took a double-blind trial. So we were writing these exercises, recycling vocabulary a lot, focusing on the 1,000 most common academic words, and providing feedback. So if someone chose assessment, we would say, no, it's wrong. Correct answer is assess. Look, assessment is a noun. You make an assessment, complete a full assessment, you have a partial assessment. Assessed is an adjective. The word you're looking for here must be a verb, so you can assess the relative efficacy of something. Well, I mean, this was great, but the problem was we started writing this. Our boss said, this is brilliant. We can use this for future generations. Wonderful. We said, this took us like 8 hours to write just this first 4 exercises. Are we getting paid for this? Oh no, this is part of your job. At which point we all just said, well, there's no way we're going to spend all our free time doing this so that you have material that you can benefit from after we've left the university. It's just not fair. So it can be really good. It can help show students how language is used. It can contribute to usage. It can encourage noticing, but it takes time to write this stuff. And personally, I think if you're taking my time, pay me. And, as a group of teachers, we just flat out refused in the end. And in the end, we were paid by the university, but it was a fight to get to that stage. I think we also just need to ask, is technology inherently motivating? We often talk about, our teenagers are screenagers. Well, most students aren't screenagers 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Yes, they use their screens, but it's not for academic purposes generally. Most students use their screens to, watch YouTube videos, send Snapchat messages, look at Instagram, use Facebook or whatever, but they're certainly not necessarily using it or expecting to use it for academic purposes. And the bottom line, I think, is motivated students are motivated whatever medium things are delivered in. A motivated student will write their homework on the back of a piece of toilet paper. The same motivated student will write their homework online or on a blog or via WhatsApp. In my experience, even with teachers, okay, when you set up extra digital spaces and you offer extra digital opportunities, like maybe you set up a forum or a chat room or a chat group for a course, the first question people always ask is it assessed? Do I have to do this? And, if you say, no, it's not assessed, but it would be nice if you used the digital space provided for you, if you took advantage of this digital opportunity to engage with the other people on the course. I don't have to do it, so I'm not going to do it. After 2 weeks, the two keen students who will be anywhere to talk about this stuff will be doing the talking to themselves. Everyone else is off probably watching, roller skating dogs on YouTube or something. So tech is generally only motivating for most students if they think they have to do it. I mean, I'm the same. I have on my iPhone an app called Quizlet, where I test myself on my foreign languages. My main foreign language is Indonesian, because I used to live in Indonesia. My wife's Indonesian. Sometimes I try to test myself, but then I think, oh, I'll just check Facebook. Oh, I'll just have a look at how my football team's doing. I'll just have a quick look at Instagram. It's much easier to be distracted when you're using tech tools, actually, than it is when you're in a room with a piece of paper. So tech isn't inherently motivating. On top of this, a lot of what we see is basically just a new digitalized version of very old-fashioned techniques. So I showed you earlier Lingro. If you look up a word, it will keep a list of the words you've looked up, and it can help you gamify these words. Well, what they mean by gamify is they will make very basic cards for you, like the old-fashioned flashcards that you maybe make for yourself, or a bit like Quizlet, but not as good in this case. And you look at these words, and here you can see English, Spanish, and they're all single words. You can't change or add to this. You look at the English word, you say the Spanish word, you flip it over, you check that you've got it. Well, you can do that with pieces of paper on the bus. I spent years doing that with other languages that I was learning. It's still a grind. It's still a bit boring. It's still hard work. And because it's focused only on single words, it's also not massively useful. So, yes, new technology, but old and actually quite outdated technique. I think on top of all of this, the idea of tech making things easier for students might not actually be a good idea. That maybe there's something to be said for making things difficult. Hi, Samir, I saw you raised your hand. I'll come to questions at the end, okay? So hold the question, yeah? You'll be the first person I ask, Samir. But actually, maybe by making things easier to remember, it's in a way not doing students any favors. There's been a lot of research into the effect that the internet has had on memory. There was a guy called Sparrow who suggested that, Google is actually kind of destroying our memories because we remember how to find things rather than the actual content. There's also been a lot of research to suggest that reading online, reading hypertext, makes us remember less content and less language than reading on paper. Because what's happening is we're getting distracted all the time. There's all these images around the text we're reading. There's hyperlinks that we click. We vanish down the rabbit hole and we forget what we were reading in the first place. We get a pop-up message come in through WhatsApp. When you're reading on paper, there's no distractions apart from the outside world. Interestingly, in the UK, the move towards buying paper books, there's a kind of resurgence of people buying paper books, mainly the under 25s. Okay, so the under 25s are kind of recognizing, if I'm going to read, paper book, thank you. The internet's great, but reading better on paper. I think also we sometimes expect technology to help us interact better. But my own feeling is that interactivity comes from what we say and do as teachers and how we interact with our students, how we get our students to interact with each other, and how we encourage interaction with the material we're looking at. It's facilitated by us as teachers, whether we're in a digital classroom or a physical bricks and mortar classroom, not through technology. So if you're doing a vocab exercise, you might see online self-study exercises which say interactive language practice. What they mean is it will tell you if the answer's correct or not and give you a little carrot, a digital carrot to gamify it and make it more interactive. Well, for me, when I'm teaching online and I'm checking something like a vocab exercise, I make the language interactive through the questions I ask. So if I'm going through and saying, right, number one, you can leave your front door unlocked at night if you like, because crime is almost good, non-existent. It almost doesn't exist. What else might be almost non-existent? What do you think? Number two, the economy's in a total mess. There's a recession. Good. What usually happens when there's a recession? Yeah, unemployment goes up, companies go bankrupt. Yeah, okay. And what's the opposite? The economy is booming. Yeah, what happens when the economy is booming? Yeah, unemployment goes down, new companies spring up all over the place, companies start taking on new staff. Good, okay. Their policies are undermining national unity. What kind of policies might undermine national unity? For example, here in the UK, Brexit. You know, a wonderful policy invented by an idiot government to encourage every family to argue with itself for the next 5 years. With so little rain, there are a lot of water shortages. Good. What other kind of shortages can you have? Yeah, so there can be a shortage of flour or a shortage of rice. Okay, anything else? Their policies have boosted our standing in the world. They've made us better known and more popular. What other things might boost our standing in the world? Yeah, maybe hosting an international sports competition. Okay, maybe, yeah, brokering a peace deal between neighboring countries boosts your standing. Great. Or maybe coming up with a COVID vaccine. Good example. So by asking these kinds of questions, you're making things. Turn your mic off. You're making things more interactive.
Wait a while.
Yeah, sorry, Farah. Oh, it wasn't you. Yeah. Okay, sorry. You're making things more interactive through the questions you ask and through what you expect back from your students. And these kind of questions are open. You know, can you think of any other things that might? What happens if? They're focused on the typical reasons for things happening or the typical outcomes of things happening. They look at different aspects of word knowledge, and they kind of allow you to personalize the language by students providing their own personal ideas and examples to fill the space that you've created through the questions you ask. So this brings us to what principles should guide what we do as online teachers. One good place to look for inspiration is the Common European Framework, which provides some ideas for why we're teaching, okay? What are the principles that underpin our teaching? I know that sometimes when I was a younger teacher, I used to believe that, the goal of language teaching is to present, practice, and get my students to produce the present perfect simple. Well, the Common European Framework doesn't see it like that. It says the goal of all language teaching, any language teaching, should be to help our students deal with the business of everyday life in a foreign country, and to help them help foreign people in their country deal with the business of everyday life. We should be aiming to help our students exchange ideas, feelings, thoughts, and opinions. We should be helping them to understand other cultures, other ways of thinking, other ways of living better. And to do that, maybe we should be defining worthwhile and realistic objectives for those students at that level as explicitly as possible. We should be basing our teaching and learning on their needs, their characteristics, and using them as a resource. Okay? All of these seem really sensible to me. And if you're going into a classroom, digital or otherwise, look at what you're going to be doing and ask yourself, well, am I helping them deal with the business of everyday life? Am I exchanging ideas and feelings? Am I helping them understand other ways of thinking better? If not, well, maybe you should be, okay? I think there are also learning principles that we need to bear in mind. In order to learn any piece of language, really, you need to understand the meaning. You need to notice something about how that language works. What's the form? How is it used? Which words does it go with? You probably need to hear it. You need to do something with it. And then you need repeated exposure and experience to that language. So again, when you're teaching online or in a real physical classroom, are you making sure that you're helping students understand meaning and notice aspects of the language? Are you helping them hear it? Are you giving them something to do with that language? And are you repeating these steps over time? In terms of the principles around language, my own feeling is it's really important to think about real usage. What do we actually do, or what will students hear or see being done with the language we're teaching? Okay, and as teachers, can I show them typical ways in which the language is used? I believe that grammar and vocabulary are interdependent. When we're looking at vocabulary, we should be showing it in real world contexts with the grammar and the other words it's often used with. When we're teaching grammar, we should be showing students normal, common, typical examples of what that grammar is used to do in everyday life. Ultimately, I think, particularly at kind of intermediate and above, vocabulary is more important than grammar. You cover most of the grammar you need quite early on. I think better skills, any skills, digital skills, critical thinking skills, listening skills, speaking skills, whatever, those skills get better as you learn more language. You want to learn to listen better, learn more language. You want better 21st century skills, learn more language. I think also students' wants and needs and current abilities should really be what determines the level of input that we provide, rather than a fixed ticking off the boxes grammatical syllabus. And when it comes to vocabulary, we should be thinking about, is this vocabulary frequent? Is it useful? Will it help them achieve desirable outcomes? If yes, great, you've got a really good lesson, whether you're delivering that digitally or face-to-face. For me, as a kind of language school owner and language school teacher with Lexical Lab, if people ask, why should we study with you? What makes you special? Well, we promise all of our classes are rich in language. We try to make sure the language is useful in terms of helping you achieve particular communicative outcomes. We always create space in our lessons to use the students as a resource, to come up with ideas, to give us ideas to work with and put into better English. We create space for exchanging ideas, thoughts, feelings, opinions, experiences. We try to encourage students to recognize and accept difference of opinions, diversity of ways of expressing oneself, ways of speaking, ways of being. And often through the homework that we give, we provide links to continued learning, which may involve interacting with the online world. So I think that's what we believe as a school. This brings us really to some final principles, okay? These are really principles we should all be asking ourselves when we're using technology or not. I mean, I'm guessing at some point COVID ends and, you know, if we survive, we can all go back and teach in physical bricks and mortar classrooms. Same issue. Main thing we should be focusing on is not, am I using different tech tools in my class? The main focus needs to be, are you focusing on useful language relevant to your students' level? And will this language help them achieve a stated communicative outcome? What will this language help them be better able to talk about, read about, listen about, speak about at the end of this lesson? In your lesson, is there space for your students? If yes, and you're teaching online, great. It sounds like you're doing really, really good things. Sometimes maybe a non-tech way might be better. It might be faster. It might be easier. Maybe not. But, you know, it's possible. And I think finally, we just need to try to achieve some kind of balance in our lives, okay? I mean, this has been a long, stressful year for all of us. And we need to make sure we don't let workaholics be our role model. I still remember the first time I saw a teacher talking about using class blogs. I was at a TESOL conference in Spain, and this great young teacher was talking about how she makes blogs with all of her teenage classes, and she showed all these examples, and everyone was really impressed until someone put their hand up and said, I'm really amazed by what you're doing, but can I ask, where do you find the time? Because it looks quite time consuming. And she said, yeah, I must admit, to be honest, I do spend most of my weekends working on this. And at this point, I just thought, just stop, don't do this, because you're making life difficult for your colleagues, okay? Your students will kind of say, oh, I want to be in her class, not his class, because she does blogs, he doesn't. He's thinking, yeah, I've got 3 children at home and I play football on a Sunday. So, you know, I would like a weekend, please. It also means you're setting yourself this ridiculous bar. You're basically saying, I will work for free every weekend for the rest of my career. You know, your boss is watching you kind of going, great. I mean, I think we all need to recognize that as teachers, we have these tendencies within us. We like helping. You know, we want to try and make life easier for our students, but for God's sake, don't let workaholics define how we work. There's more to life than teaching. And maybe if you spend your weekend not making class blogs for your students, they won't die, they won't miss what they never had, and you might be a better teacher because you're getting some exercise, you're going for a walk in the countryside with your family, you're reading a book that's not about teaching, you're meeting people and talking to them about other things apart from teaching, and you're having an outside world enrich you so that you can go into your own classrooms a better, richer, more emotionally fulfilled kind of person. So I'm going to finish there. I'll just say that if you're interested in seeing what we do as an online school, having a look at our lessons, having a look at our teacher development courses, please check out lexicallab.com. If you're on Facebook, please find Lexical Lab Limited and like us. And if any of you want to get in touch or ask any questions because you're too shy to do so now, please feel free to email me. I think what we'll do now is I'll just see if anyone has any questions. I think Samir should be first. I remembered that you had your hand up at some point. You can either put the question. Sorry, Amanullah, go on.
Yep, thanks for very much. It was enlightening and wonderful session with you. Thanks for all those thoughts on teacher well-being, and I do think that at this point of time, these thoughts were much needed for all our audience, and yeah, it was a great session with you. So for now, if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat box. We'll be looking at. And I remember there was a question on motivation. You said motivated students will be motivated either ways. So how do you motivate your students, and how yeah, some thoughts or tips on motivating students?
I guess for me, the way I think about motivation is to think about my own experience of school. I didn't enjoy school very much, and I didn't like most of my teachers, mainly because they didn't like me. And so there was this kind of circle of mutual dislike. The teachers that motivated me and the teachers that had the biggest impact on me motivated me because they treated me like a human being. They asked for my stories, they valued my opinions, they told me their own stories, they shared their thoughts, feelings and ideas. We discussed things, and I felt valued and recognized as a human being more than I did in all of the other classes. And so I think as teachers, the way we really motivate our students isn't to do with technology. It's to do with the relationships that we develop with our students, what we give of ourselves and what we ask them to share from themselves and how we respond to them. If what we're doing is basically saying, no, you got the present perfect wrong and you can't pronounce 3 trees correctly, well, good luck, you're going to kill that student's motivation. If what we're doing is talking to them saying, oh, that sounds amazing. Where did that happen? Oh, wow, really? Oh, by the way, it should have been blah, blah, blah. Well, that's a very different psychology, okay? So I think treat your students first and foremost as human beings. Yeah? Would be my
feeling. Excellent.
I've seen another question now. Someone raised their hand.
So there's another question that, what are some of the references you would suggest for students? Some of the references to share with the students. I don't know what levels students are, but Elaine asked this question, so if you could specify.
So my answer to that is it very much depends. I mean, my first homework is always go home, try to learn what we looked at in class today. Okay. And to be honest, for most students, that's all I expect of them. I mean, a lot of students are like a lot of teachers. They're busy. You're lucky if they find an hour to study before the next class. I try to encourage them to do things like Quizlet. I have a video about how I use Quizlet. So if anyone's interested, email me and I'll send that on to you. I think the first thing should be work out ways of helping you to remember the language that you've encountered in class. So, I mean, that would be the main thing I would emphasize, rather than taking them to all manner of other sites. First, focus on trying to remember what's come up in class. And, maybe making available to them some tech tools that help them do that. I see there's a question from Amir. How many words are acceptable to teach each session? Well, the problem with that question is, I guess, Amir, is how do you know which of the words you're looking at in the classroom are new for who? Okay, unless everyone's an absolute beginner, different students will know different amounts. So from that exercise I looked at earlier about there's a recession, it's undermined national unity, it's boosted our standing. At that level, like upper intermediate level, some students will know most of that language. Some students will know some of that language. The number of new words there will be different for each student in the class, Okay, some students might know the word boost, but not in the context of boosting our standing in the world. So I think often it's very difficult to say what's new for who. Okay, I think also just because you present something for the first time, for me as a teacher, I don't expect students to always remember everything and start using everything. I think a lot of the time it's basically like you're throwing language into the mixer, you're keeping the language moving and going round like this, and it sticks in different ways at different times. The one thing I would say is more language is always better than less language, okay? And when you have longer examples, like you saw in that exercise, those examples recycle other bits of language. So there will be other things in there that students see and go, oh yeah, we had that before. Oh, I remember that now. Yeah, so it's a hard question to answer, I think. Yeah, there's another question from Amina. Workbooks, it's a good way to recycle. Yes, absolutely. I mean, I know for myself as a coursebook writer, the workbooks that come with the series that I've written are written very much to revise and develop, or kind of, go over, consolidate and expand on the language that appears in the coursebook. So I think it's a good idea. What I do usually is when we finish unit 2 in a coursebook, I ask them to do unit 1 in the workbook. Okay, so they're always kind of forced to go back a little bit further, because the easiest thing to do when you're learning a language is forget. And I think anything we can do as teachers to intervene in that process of forgetting is really, really useful. According to yeah, Collins is good. I mean, to be honest, Alina, sorry, not sure how to pronounce your name. I think any of the dictionaries published by the big publishing houses, so the Oxford Advanced Learners, the Cambridge Online Dictionary, the Macmillan Advanced Learners Dictionary, Collins is great. All of those ones by the big international publishing houses are written by people who know how to explain language to foreign students. And I would always recommend those over the kind of free ones that are added to those kind of sites. The reason sites like Lingro don't use those is because they don't want to pay Macmillan or Collins or whoever to use their material. So instead you get a kind of cheap, fake, rubbish version. So yeah, I would say that. Is there a
There's
PowerPoint
one
file?
other question from Amina. She said, how do you really know that certain vocabulary are more useful than others? Is it frequency? How
Yeah, so
can
I think it's
non-native
two or
teachers?
three things. You know
Mhm.
something's useful. One, if students have tried to say it, okay? So maybe students are telling a story and they say, oh, I fell from the boat and I nearly died in water. And you go, oh yeah, you nearly drowned, okay? In that context, I know that's useful because that's what students have tried to say. Also, when I'm choosing vocabulary to focus on, I think about two things. Is it quite a common word? Is it frequent? If you're not sure, check in a good dictionary, check in the Macmillan dictionary. It will tell you how frequent the words are. Also, is it a piece of vocabulary that's going to help them to talk about the topic that you're talking about better? Okay. If it is, then it's probably useful and relevant for them within the context of the discussion or the topic that you're focusing on at the moment. And, in the end, on top of all of those things, you have to trust your own instincts. So you have to get better at developing your instincts. My instincts about this aren't good because I'm a native speaker. They're good because I've spent years and years thinking about frequency and what's useful and how best to say things. And sometimes I still teach things where later I go home and think, that was useless. I should have taught this. This is more frequent. This is more useful. So we all make mistakes with this and we're all learning from this all the time. But I think the process of thinking about what's common, what's useful at the moment, what does my student mean here? What language can I give them to say what they're trying to say better? Those are really important things to get in the habit of doing. Anything else I've missed? Use of L1. Oh, yeah, from Hanan. I think if you are a bilingual teacher teaching monolingual students and you share a first language with them, you're crazy if you're not using first language sometimes. Okay. Obviously you don't want to be using it all the time, but you have a superpower. If I was teaching in your context, I couldn't do what you can do. So sometimes if someone asks you, you know, what does recession mean? Well, in your context, the easiest way may be initially to say, in our language, we say this. Okay. Then you can still give an example in English. You know, there was a terrible recession. Thousands of people lost their jobs. But the explanation can often be done quickest by using L1. Sometimes when you're explaining things, students will say, oh, you mean this word in our language? Yes, it's that. Fine. Move on. So I think, you know, if you've been told never use L1, this is crazy. You have this kind of superpower. You know, you're bilingual in a class where you share a language with your students. Use that talent that you've got, use that skill, but, you know, use it in a sensible, principled way. Sorry, Amanullah, I interrupted you. Do we have anything else?
No, thanks, Steph. I don't see any questions, and you know, it was a pleasure having you. Thanks again for being with us, and you can follow social media channels. This recording will be made available at YouTube channel later this evening, and you know, so you can see all social media channels here, and so we are seeing a rise in COVID-19 here. So I would like to remind you all to be, you know, careful about your and your loved ones' lives. Keep practicing physical distancing, wearing masks, and social solidarity.
Yeah.
So stay safe, everyone. Bye bye from my side. Thanks very much for your participation. We appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone. Yeah, keep in touch, and thank you, Amanullah, for the great work you're doing.